not that far away from like lab grown meat, 3D printed meats, you know, next thing you know, we'll have, you know, robot chickens laying robot eggs and all sorts of fun stuff. Like it's a cool world that we're living in, and it's going in a really interesting direction. So yeah, the Unilever sale is pretty unique. Most companies, when they divest, in my experience, of a large plant-based business, they'll usually lie about it. They'll say something along the lines of the market didn't work, or consumers' spending habits are changing, or ingredients costs got too much, or processing was the problem, or the technology's not there. There's always some excuse that's not we failed, or we didn't think about this strategically enough. And Unilever's tack is completely different. They're saying, right, we're focusing on 30 core brands. We don't need the rest of them. They're either dragging us down or not making money, and so we're going to get rid of them. And that makes perfect sense, especially because they cited the fact that they were having difficulty scaling it. So they've been brutally honest about what's happened, and it's probably the best thing they could have done. And I've been telling companies for years, when working as a consultant, that that's the way to do it. If you have a problem with it, you need to point out what the problem is, let the world solve the problem if you don't want to, and go from there. Like a good example is Arla last year divesting of their well, they didn't divest. They should have divested, but they didn't. They took their plant-based milks off the market for the same reasons that Unilever have basically said they needed to get rid of the vegetarian butcher. They do have the kit, but the kit's too big for the market, which was a strategic mishap in the first place. Nobody thought about scaling up. They thought about jumping to scale and just thought they were going to just dominate the market, which didn't happen. They didn't have the market presence. No one knows them as a plant-based brand. And no amount of telling them what way to kind of change that strategy was working. They had a strategy, they were going to stick to it, and when the strategy panned out to be a complete failure, they shuttered the thing and then blamed the market. So they said that the market had changed, that consumer habits had changed, that, you know, people weren't buying as much plant-based as they used to, that veganism is dying and all this crap. If that was the case, why is the vegetarian butcher pulling in 50 million a year, you know? And, you know, something that also jumped out to me when I was reading about it is that you've got kind of two clear delineations as to what way their strategy worked with Unilever. So on the one hand, they want to divest the 20% of brands that are just not making enough money. They have strategic targets, they have shareholders to go for. Why spend the money on something that's not actually going to get the bosses happy? Which is, you know, in my book, a good thing, can potentially lead to bad things, but it's, as a general rule, a good thing to sort out. But the other side of it was they sidestepped the fact that the vegetarian butcher's not making any money. So that's like topic one. That's a discussion in and of itself, and I have a theory as to why that's the case. But the other side of it was scalability. So when you're looking at a company like Unilever, they've got these huge big production facilities all over the world making massive amounts of food. Not very many of them are going to be plant-based. When you get a brand like the vegetarian butcher, you're entering a fast-flowing river of innovation. So what's here today is gone in 2 months' time or 3 months' time when the new thing comes out. I mean, we're not that far away from like lab grown meat, 3D printed meats, you know, next thing you know, we'll have, you know, robot chickens laying robot eggs and all sorts of fun stuff. Like it's a cool world that we're living in, and it's going in a really interesting direction. Well, the thing is it's going in a direction so fast that by the time you put the 20 million euro into building the plant that you need to do the job, the plant is obsolete. So entering that space, you need to really understand it, and most companies don't. What I'm looking at, or I suppose what I was thinking about Unilever, is that they do understand it and they realize they're going to be crap at it, so they're getting rid of it to someone who is good at it. And then like on top of that, then, because you've got such a fast moving market, you've got this whole thing that, you know, that the team in the vegetarian butcher, they're not making any money, and there's a million reasons for that. More often than not, I think it kind of hinted at it when they said that part of the reason they couldn't scale was technology. They didn't have the plants to do it. But the other side was that it needed a really specific supply chain, because they have frozen and chilled products, and frozen and chilled products, that's like, you know, it's, if you consider them both as, I don't know, an interesting way of looking at it would be like, imagine building a vehicle that's going to go a place. Frozen is a vehicle that will fly you to the moon. Chilled is a vehicle that will take you to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. You cannot interchange those two. You are not taking a submarine to the moon. It's a vastly different setup. It's like, especially with chilled stuff, like the time between when it leaves and when it arrives and when it hits distribution centers and when it leaves distribution centers is like teeny tiny. When it's frozen, you can just whack it in a warehouse and leave it there for a year before you ship it. So it's really easy with frozen, but it's also more expensive because the kit is ridiculous. So if you don't already have chilled and frozen as an entire area baked into your kind of core delivery service as a business, and you don't have innovation services that can keep up with the pace, and you also don't have production services, you're not going to make any money. There's no question about it. You either focus on those key areas and build on them, or you don't and do something you're already good at, which is what they're doing. They're going, right, we're terrible at this. We make mayonnaise and stuff to wash your clothing. Why are we making fake meats? Yeah. And it's a perfectly logical way of doing it. It tells you that the management team in Unilever are really good at their jobs.
Okay.
And then, on the Vivera side, then it makes perfect sense to hand it over to Vivera. They're already owned by a company, JBL? No, they make headphones. I can't remember who they are, but they're a really big meat company.
The big meat guys, yeah.
Yeah, the big meat guys, yeah. So they're invested.
JBS,
that's the one, yeah. And the brand Vivera has been around for, I don't know, since 1991, I think I read somewhere. Like it's good and old now. It's only just a bit younger than me. What's really interesting though is you've got the vegetarian butcher, 55 countries, 50 million in turnover. Vivera, 25 countries, a whole lot less turnover, and yet they're capable of buying one from the other, which I think is interesting. I really thought it would have gone the other way around, but it's just this interesting strategic scenario that's happening there.
They have a big meat company that's backing them, so maybe
that's probably it. Yeah, I think it's more of a JBS is buying vegetarian butcher than anything else. It's it's just really, really interesting. It's a much more sensible way to go because the brand is moving over to a new brand. It's pretty much going to stay there. The necessary effect of that, usually with something like that, you'd be worried about what would happen to the brand in terms of its production, in terms of its capabilities. Like a big sale like that tends to be short-term bad, long-term good, or it gets completely cannibalized and it's just dumped in a heap at the end. That's not going to happen. You've got Vivera who are just going to suddenly open up to 55 markets. At the same time as being able to properly scale with their own proper distribution centers or proper distribution channels, on top of which they've already got all of the innovation kit that the guys in vegetarian butchers want. So that's a match made in heaven. It's absolutely beautiful the way it's worked out, and it should be a lesson to A, plant-based companies, and B, bigger dairy companies, meat companies that are entering that space. Is like, that's how you want to do it. It's fast moving. You need to have the capabilities. You can't fuck around in this market.
And because it's chilled or frozen, these are already things that meat companies have.
Yeah, exactly.
They've got the supply chain. They've got the, machinery even to do it. The plants can manage plant-based mince, I guess.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, so when you're looking at that, there's a couple of different stages. The grizzly side, we won't talk about that. Never want to think about that stuff. Then there's the packing side, so it'll be processed and then put in packs. You might have repackers where it's a carcass that's shipped out or something like that. Once you get to the point where you're at the repackers, that's really where you can get a little bit creative about how you bring stuff in. So it's possible to build a vegan specific line within a space like that. Provided you segregate it out, but you can still use a lot of the same machinery. But yeah, you can take old lines from the meat plants and move them into there. Make sure you've got the right cleaning kit and all the rest, and then you're good to go. So it's entirely possible, and yet the trucks are the same. Once it's packaged, it doesn't matter what it's sitting next to. And especially with chilled is really interesting. I toured a couple of facilities a few years back where we got a really strong indication as to how it all worked. We were rolling a brand into a major distribution chain within a large multiple here in Ireland, and so we went and visited their head office, got a look at how it all sets up, and pretty much your order comes in, let's say Monday. You have 48 hours to execute that order. It has to be at the distribution center at the assigned time. So the order comes in, and you pretty much right there and then have to say, I will be there at 5 o'clock on Wednesday morning, between 5 and 10, and 5 o'clock and 5:10 o'clock. Like, you have a 10-minute window to get that truck in. If you fail, you pay a penalty. So it's hugely quick. So if you have a fresh product or chilled product that needs to be manufactured after the order comes in, you have a tiny window to produce. Once you've actually got it done, then obviously you need your chain of custody. So within your warehouse, you're measuring temperatures the whole way along. You've final QC and all the rest, and then once that's done, it goes on the back of the truck. You have to have a monitor in the truck that can be signed off as accurate to tell you what the temperature of the truck is. And if it's something that comes out hot and has to be chilled, you need a blast chiller. It needs to go in that truck at the right temperature, so it's expensive. Lots and lots of kit to get there. So once you've got it in the back of the truck, you've the monitoring the whole way. You have to arrive in the distribution centre, unload it. It's tested as it's being unloaded. Anything that fails goes back in the truck and it's onto the back to the manufacturer. It's really tiny little fluctuations. You're talking 4.5 degrees to 5.1 degrees. 5.1 degrees, it's in the bin. There's no question. Then it gets into the warehouse, but the warehouse then has to follow those same rules to get it out to however many different stores. So it might be between 4 in the morning and 6 in the morning. There's this massive flurry of activity, and then 6:30, done, empty, the whole store. There's nothing kept in stock ever for chilled distribution. So it's it's every second of it is last minute, every second, the whole time. Nothing escapes that whirlwind. It's just amazing. I stood there for an hour and watched it, and in the space of an hour, a warehouse that was like a quarter mile long in every direction filled and emptied like that. There was like 1,000 dudes with forklifts just running around in this freezing cold room all morning. The frozen side is completely different. Put the order in on Monday, have it by Friday, it's cool. They'll buy 3-4 times the amount they think they need. Maybe you won't get an order next week. It's cool, they have it in stock. And it's just as and when it's needing to go in and out. But the cost of it, like the longer it sits in that room, the more space it's taking up. And to get that room cold, especially on a hot day, is just really, really hard. So it's just, you want it to look like the other setup, but it's got a lot more forgiveness in the model. Okay. So if you're not set up for both of those, you really are in a tough strategic position. And I've worked on both, and it sucks. It's very much pick a lane, makes life a lot easier. But yeah, it's stuff like that. Like you'll see a lot of waste in scenarios like that. That could also account for why vegetarian butcher seems to not be breaking the profit sort of ceiling. Then you've got your innovation costs as well. My guess is it's wastage that's probably causing them the biggest hassle. Anywhere you see the word chilled, you'll see wastage. And if that factor is 20%, then that's way higher than your profit. So it gets expensive.
Is this a huge reason why a lot of other companies that have invested in plant-based meats are trying to wriggle out of it?
Yeah.
Or at least cutting costs, rationalizing their product portfolio.
There's usually an excuse, yeah. So I think to really boil it down, it's often ego, right? And I understand it, but I love money. And so ego doesn't play a part in how I tend to run my projects. I want it to work. I want the success of it working. I don't give a crap how I look or who I make friends with or not. Like, it's just not relevant. So I find this really, really strange, but I see it all over the place. It's like middle management 101, right? So they just don't want to admit they fucked up. So usually what happens is they'll get a remit. We're X meat company or X dairy company, and we want to go into plant-based, right? Because our customers are asking for it, because our own market share is dropping and we can't do anything about it. So we need to be somewhere where we can play in a space, right? So the first thing they forget to do is check the size of the actual market itself, right? And actually realistically understand what that means. Percent. If you're making £1 billion, you are not making £1 billion in plant-based meats. There's no way. You can only shore up the gap so much because the market is growing, but it's not growing at such a rate that you can expect it to be huge. That's usually the first mess they make. And it usually falls on some middle manager who gets put in a position where he's like being told, go and do plant-based, and he has to go and do it, right? So the budgets are never big enough initially, and then all of a sudden the budgets are too big. This is a classic problem, and I have seen this a bunch of times, where you get companies that they do their research and they do their initial ideation and they do all of that kind of stuff, and then they forget to actually ask the question. Let's say it's a dairy company and you want to make a new flavor of yogurt, and you already have 140 years of yogurt making. Yeah, we can make strawberry and lime in like 5 weeks. No problem. Ready to go. If you want to take that and you want to make vegan bacon, well, the person who does that R&D person, that's an R&D person that specializes in yogurt. They've got a PhD in yogurt flavors. Like, there's no question about it. They do not know what they're doing and will have to learn. It's going to take 2 years, So they misinterpret that. So what then happens is also you've got the other side of it, which is now that they've picked products they wanted and they have instructed the people in R&D to go and make them, they'll step into the commercial mindset and they'll start looking at how big is the market. Oh, the market for plant-based is massive. It's this amount of billions. We're going to take 25% of the market in year one. All the usual bullshit that goes with that kind of stuff, right? And there's loads of mistakes that happen in that space. Eventually you get to a position where they've got a product that was developed at the speed that a dairy company or a meat company works at, which is say 2 years. By then, we're already walking on Mars. Like, we've left the planet. Plant-based has moved on so much. We're faking live chickens now, right? It's that fast. So you're obsolete on day one. Big mistake, right? They launch on the market and they're too expensive. They think they're going to get massive sales straight away, but the really critical mistake they always make is in the kit. So again, back to budget too small, budget too big very quickly. They want to hit it hard and fast because they know it's a fast moving market. They should have paid attention when it was in innovation, but they didn't. They paid attention to it in marketing. for something that's now no longer relevant. So we're selling a Ford Model T here, and Tesla's just launched the Cybertruck. You're not going to get a market share there. Does not matter how many millions you pour into your Google ads. So once you've got to that point, the classic mistake happens that it's in the kit setup. So now they're building a plant. So they might already have the space, often is the case, but you're going to go and have to buy a big reactor, you're going to have to buy mixing equipment, you're going to have to buy new lines, all of this kind of stuff, right? And you have a choice. You already know that your margins are going to be great on your products, but you've paid for 2 or 3 years of development, and you've millions in your budget for marketing. So you've spent a lot of money, right? But you also know that the company says pay back in 3 years or you're fired, right? So now you have to figure out what do I do here? You can only buy kit once. You cannot go into another CapEx project in 3 years' time when it's relevant. So you buy the biggest machine you can afford. The problem is now your minimum order quantity is huge. You've got this gigantic oven. You can't just heat it for a small tray at the bottom. It costs $2,000 an hour to run. So you need to be able to fill it. And so you fill it and you try and add more markets, but you can't because your marketing budget's already been spent on the other markets. So you can see where the cycle of just shitty management just kind of rolls on. And this just happens everywhere. I've seen it in basically every company I've worked for. Most of the time I just go in and pick one of those problems and try and solve it. And to varying degrees of success, it really depends on the appetite for the management to hear, guys, you fucked up. Usually it's guys, you fucked up and here's a plan to fix it. Because the reality is what you should do is go in and buy the smallest kit you can find and max that out, and then scream the top of your voice, you have hit your max capacity and you need to buy another one. That's a better message. Someone is going to hear that and go, so you spent 15 million on this kit and now we're buying it again and you need to spend 30 million on the kit. The big message there is check how much the kit is going to be worth when you go to sell it. And then say, actually, no, I only need 5 million to upgrade. But we hit max capacity. Look at us, we're doing great. What a brilliant business. But they never think about that. So there's these kind of stage by stage mistakes that are made by companies that are too big and too slow to be in this market. Unilever called that out. Basically, that's exactly the structure that they had a problem with. They couldn't innovate fast enough. They can't handle the distribution. They don't have the kit. It made sense at the time to buy it because they needed a position in the market. But now it's nonsense. So off to Vivera. And that's why it's such a great one. I've seen so many companies fuck that up, and it's nice to see one doing it right this time. I'd invest in Unilever with news like that. They obviously know their stuff.
That's kind of good to hear.
Yeah.
When I read the news, I was just like, oh, one more, another one bites the dust.
Yeah.
That's exactly what went through my head.
Yeah.
And it's overall been a bad time for plant-based meat in general. But the Beyond Meat, was it Beyond Meat? They shuttered their operations in China. Impossible somehow slides through. But even corn isn't doing well, and corn has been in the market forever.
Yeah, late 70s, I think.
Yeah, and they are, I guess, the granddaddies they're the original.
Yeah. Corn's decline is easy to see, though. That one jumped out at me when I saw. I don't know. Maybe it's just being Irish, being in Ireland at the time Brexit was kicking off. I remember being in London, one side of Brexit, like a couple of weeks before the vote, and we went to this really nice bar, and everybody was having a good time, and it was London, and London's full of Irish people. They're used to the sound of our voices, and the subtle racism was held just back. Not really on a constant daily basis would you notice it. Just the odd little slight. They think less of anyone who isn't British, but they're not going to say it. And then 4 or 5 months later, I was back in the same bar. I felt under threat. We left. As soon as I went to orders completely ignored. It was like, I'm in the wrong part of town. We had to go and find an Irish part of town to get served. And that was, I was like, I still haven't been back. I'm never going to the UK again. It's just, sorry lads, but until you have a full left-wing government and you're back in Europe, you can sit on it. But we kind of saw that pinch happen as it all kicked in, right? And right around that time, Corn came out with a statement, and they were like, we're keeping our operations British. We want to serve the British market first. 97% of our customers are in Britain. Newsflash, lads, they're in Britain because if they headquarter in London, there's easier ways to avoid tax, but they sell to the rest of the world. And they just went full, let's wave flags around, and they lost the Irish market on the same day. Every vegetarian or vegan in Ireland just went, Nope.
Yeah.
Not dealing with that. We know what you guys are like when you really get going. We've experienced it globally for several hundred years. So like they shot themselves in the foot. They thought what they were going to do was strengthen their British base, but what they actually did was they completely shit all over everyone else in Europe. And so it was just this natural and slow decline that's been enjoyable to watch, because that management team deserved to suffer for shit like that. It's just, you know, it's just one of those things. Anything coming out of the UK has been undeniably problematic since Brexit. But I do have hope. This new government that's in there now seems a lot more friendly. It's the first time in a long time and Irish politicians have been over there, and there's been friendly consideration as to what's going on. So, you know, slowly but surely that little blip that will be Brexit, that we will all laugh at them for so many years before, is kind of solving itself. So it's not uncommon to see a bunch of those do it. It's weirder when you start seeing the Germans and the French fail. They're the ones that have put a lot more time and effort in.
I wonder if the corn story has any lessons for what's happening in the US right now.
That's a can of worms.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't even know where to start with that one. Like, it's so strange. Like, I mean, how much of the food over there is just not going to be over here? I was thinking about that recently. I was like, there's American brands that turn up in my fridge, but they're definitely not made in America. I don't think I have anything that has made in the USA written on it at all. Not deliberately, it just doesn't get here. Like, the software we're using, maybe. But that was developed by Indians for an American, so does that count? Like, you go where the IT people are. It's like if you want drugs in America, it was made by an Irish guy. It's one of those things. Yeah, it's I do kind of wonder what impact it's gonna have, but I think it's mostly gonna be investment stuff. Like but that might not be a bad thing. Like, I remember not so long ago that was it Beyond Meat or Impossible that got a 300 million valuation, like, off the bat. Like, they were a couple of weeks old. I think it was 300 million. I vaguely remember.
Is it Impossible?
I think it was Impossible. Yeah, I remember. What's that guy's name? Leonardo DiCaprio got involved, and everybody was like, "Oh, okay, Leo's is putting his money in." He's like, he's not a finance guy, you know. But then anyway, the thing that jumped out at me was that of all of that, they sell one burger at this point, right? And they this huge valuation. They're like, the 300 million raised. I think it was on like a $3 billion valuation. So I sat down one day and I thought, right, okay, I have a fairly good understanding of economics. Let's work this out. If you replaced every burger in the world, every meat burger, yeah, maybe that's a valuation you might have. But you're not going to do that when like 1% of the market is vegan. So year one, the people who are actually going to try it, there's nowhere near 3. There might be 3 million or maybe 30 million, but it's just wrong. And then there's the whole idea that, oh yeah, you know, that's the company valuation. You buy into it now and it'll be worth billions when they replace cows. How long is that going to take? You know, like, probably the same length of time it took for us to go from hunter-gatherers to agriculture. You know, a couple thousand years. Like, I mean, realistically, you know, maybe we can do it quicker. Maybe we can do it in under 1,000 years. But it's just so unlikely. So it's such a bullshit valuation. Like, that's
What company do you think is actually doing a good job with this?
So on the local level, I would probably say, well, one company I recently worked with very briefly is called Finnebrogue Artisan. Now, they're originally a meat company, but their whole remit is figure it out first, worry about the specifics later, which is a really nice way of looking at innovation. They know it's messy, it takes a little bit of time to figure it out, and they're willing to put the effort in. And they will do weird stuff, like a vegan crab croquette for Asda for Christmas. You know, small, quick runs on well figured out machinery. You know, anywhere where you can find an allegory between. Actually, here's a great way to look at it. Right, craft beer had the same problem a few years back. Right, so you've got the big guys. They can afford to buy 10,000 cans and call that a small run, and they'll print the whole can and it'll look beautiful and it goes out. Right. Small guys, canning is very, very expensive because there's no like small canning units. The minimum size is probably about 5,000 cans. So the cost of the can and the labor going into it is ridiculously high. So there's a couple of different canning companies that started doing like the stick-on label. So they could buy 10,000 and they could run the machine with a slight increase in cost because they were stopping production of one product and moving to another, but it's all cleanable, it's quite quick and easy. And the new label means the same machine the whole way through. So for ages you get all these lovely sticky on cans, so it meant that people could actually try their own small brews in stuff like that. That's the future of plant-based. So wherever you see those kind of companies that are leaning into the small runs, they're sticking with the markets that they have within the geographic area that they're not trying to go for global domination because it makes it really difficult. They're the ones that are going to win. So my guess would probably be Vivera. They've taken 30 years to get to where they're, more than that, 35 years to get to where they are. They're still profitable, but they're not big. They're usually fairly small bits. They don't have a massive range. They do have a range that's kind of slightly bigger than it should be. They could probably get rid of the falafel and not experience too much problems there. But they've focused on the money stuff, and they've grown little by little, and they've built their innovations. They're the guys that are going to stick it out. So the more I see this, the more I realize that the plant-based industry is interesting, because usually what happens is you get a new market pops up. So plant-based pops up, you get a sudden huge surge in companies, and then somewhere around the top of that, then the companies start to die off, and only the ones that are good stick around. And then it starts to curve back up again when the big companies start entering the market, and then they start divesting, and then only the few big companies that were smart enough and did it right will stick around until you have like 5 companies that dominate the market. So that's your Unilever in terms of some products that they produce. And then the only way that they can really truly innovate is by buying someone else more innovative, but they still have to understand the capabilities. And that's the traditional model, but not in plant-based. It's moving too fast, it's too different. I think it's going to get clumpy. I think just like Vivera, that are being smaller than the vegetarian butcher but subsuming them anyway, what's the next one? When they start adding new stuff to it, instead of it being one huge company buying up little guys, I think it's little guys coming together to build something that will eventually become this huge thing that sticks like rocks in space, just collapsing in on themselves in their own gravity. That's what's going to give us these kind of super powered vegan companies. So it's really hard to predict which one of them is going to come out, but I think it's going to be a little bit more like the Indian steel industry. Arcelor and Mittal smashed together. They're almost the same size. Now they're the biggest steel company in the world. It's going to be a bit more like that, I think, than it will be big companies winning. I don't think the big companies have a chance here anymore.
It's nice to see the small guys get some.
Yeah, isn't it? It's always going to be the lefty small guys that save the world, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly.
Billions already. If you've already got money. What was it? I am by no means a religious person at all, nor did I particularly enjoy religious education when I was in school. But one thing stuck out at me, and I remember thinking, that's a fucking funny line. And I'm not even sure I'm getting it right, and I'm sure whoever ends up watching this, if they do follow a faith, will probably be mildly offended. There's this point at which Pontius Pilate is standing in front of Jesus, and he's looking at him, and he says to him, "So what's the story with the afterlife?" And he gives him this speech, and he's like, "Shit, man, Romans, we've got everything. I had grapes for lunch. It's beautiful out. I have wine in my hand. How could it possibly get better than this? Why would I need an afterlife when this one's perfect? And I always think about that when it comes to the motivations of rich people in those positions in those big companies. They already have it made. They don't need to do it. All they're going to do is make it worse. But the small guys, we're the ones with the hope, that want to kind of step out of that and go, right, okay, I'd like the planet to survive just a bit longer. It's maybe not die of heart disease at 55. There's only small things we're asking for here as people, right? But it's it's funny. That allegory always kicks in. It's I always see them like Pontius Pilate. Not that I see myself as Jesus by any stretch of the imagination, despite the beard, but it's interesting to see, if you're thinking about the motivations of big corporations, that's actually a pretty good way of looking at it. They've already got the world.
If you think of climate change, they're fine. It's the little people who are going,
yeah.
It's a problem.
They've already got the bunkers.